everyone, and welcome to the Fall Book Fest of 2023. My name is Amy Ravichandran, and today I am joined by 4 amazing and talented horror writers. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we're going to start this conversation. So, Keith, I'm going to kick it to you first.
Hello there, my name is Keith Anthony Baird. I am a dark fiction author based in the UK in the north of the country. I'll pass you over to Francesca.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca Maria. I'm based in California, and I write dark fantasy and horror. And my collection, They Hide Short Stories to Tell in the Dark, just came out from Brigids Press earlier this year. Over to you, Mo.
Hi, my name is Mo Mashadi. I am a horror author based in New York and headed to the UK. So hopefully me and Keith can have a cuppa sometime. My book, Love the Sinner, 8 Stories Bound by Sin, just came out through Brigids Gate Press on July 5th. And I'm loving being able to speak about it. Heading it over to Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Ellis. I'm a writer of dark fiction and dark poetry. I'm based in Wrexham, and I had a book out recently with Brigids Gate Press, The Woodcutter, so recently that I haven't got it on the shelf with all my other ones.
Well, I have had the pleasure of reading and helping launch almost all of your guys' books, if not all of your books, that Brigids Gate Press has done. And you guys keep me up at night. Like, you guys are some very talented horror writers. And so I'm dying to know, this is a question for everybody, what do you find truly scares reader within your horror genre that you guys write in? Keith?
Me? Oh God. I don't know. I think that atmosphere is quite important, because I just think no matter what you write, whether it be kind of graphic or gruesome, if it's just not in the right setting and it's just not creating the right mood, I don't think it's really going to do that for the reader at all. You can just imagine someone sitting there, it's pitch dark outside, it's raining, they sat with one of your books, but if it's just not coming across that way, they're just going to go, I'll tell you what, I'll put Netflix on instead. There's some Marvel stuff I was thinking I was going to watch. So yeah, I think you've really got to sort of spook your reader out is kind of the way I sort of approach the whole thing. And I don't know, it's kind of like trying to sort of pull the reader into that setting. So like no matter where they are, they can just kind of like feel everything, the whole vibe and the whole mood of wherever, you're setting your story. So for me, that's kind of like a very key element of what I try to do anyway. So there you go.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a reader standpoint, because I love horror and thrillers, those are my genre. If you can't like set the mood where I can envision it being there and like people around the corner and it being dark and dreary and all of that, then I'm kind of lost from it, right? From a reader's perspective. But Francesca, what about you? What do you find that truly scares your readers?
I have no idea. So my collection, I've got 13 short stories in my collection, and they're all vastly different. And the stuff that I found scary when I was writing it, people were like, nah, no big deal. And the stuff that I thought was like, no big deal, people were like, oh my God, it kept me up at night. So really, I think it's a very subjective thing, what people gravitate towards, what resonates with them, what are their own personal fears, and do they see that on the page? For me personally, things like possession or like losing control of your mind or your body, kind of being enslaved within your body or trapped within your body, that also is what really terrifies me. So I tend to write about it a lot. And for some people, that's a trigger. For others, it's not that big of a deal. So I think it just really depends on the person.
Mo, what about you? What would you say scares your readers?
And much like Francesca, my book is a collection of short stories. So it's 8 stories bound by sin, which they're all based on the 7 deadly sins, and then what I call one bonus sin, which is mortal sin. But I think that the relatability of being able to justify something heinous, like a heinous act, where we've gotten so kind of numb to like true crime documentaries that we kind of are, not seeing how horrific that is. But also, I write a lot of horror within the mundane, like how a tear in the screen turns into a home invasion. When you're home alone and there's a sound in the basement, there's no one else that could possibly do that. That's been what I've been told, has been scary within other stories and other anthologies that I've been in, is the scariness in everyday things. There's so many things that are, we all check the back seat when we've walking through a dark parking lot and we get back into our car. We all, turn every light on in the house while we're on our way to the bathroom in the dark. It's the scary little things that, that can jump out and get you. And I think that that's one of the most relatable things that my readers have told me, that is just like, gosh, why did you make it even worse for me?
No, that is true, because I am very much, right, I am in my 30s, and I'm still very much, if I'm home alone, and I have to turn off all the lights, go to my room, I'm still the person that turns them off and then hauls it to their bedroom. Yep. I still do that. So, yes, 100%. Those like everyday realistic things that could happen to me are definitely the most scary. But Stephanie, what about you? What do you find truly scares your readers?
It's a pain going last because everyone else has said all the answers that pretty much feed into mine. I will say that Keith is the closest to mine. It's very much atmosphere, but there's also an element when I'm writing the sort of sci-fi mashup with horror. I look at modern technology, modern medicine, things that are possibilities, and then take those to see what could happen. And because this technology is just being talked about, it's slowly coming out into the papers, people start to think, oh, that could happen. And you're taking it to an extreme that they might not have thought of. And then that frightens them. So you take day-to-day things or things that possibly could happen, you use modern technology and you show people what could happen. And when you take them to that place, it's somewhere you don't really want to go. So that's another little add-on there.
Stephanie, I have read your stuff, and I have to put the lights on and read something happy. Like, and to me, that's a compliment. Like, I mean that as a compliment, because I love to be scared and those things, and it's getting harder and harder to kind of do. But I can always read a Stephanie Ellis book, and it just gets me there. So, yes, you do fabulous at that. But I am dying to know, before we kind of jump into some of these other questions, what book that you guys read that made you guys just love horror, and it kind of evolved into you guys becoming a horror writer. So I'm going to start with Stephanie this time. We're going to work backwards. So I'm going to start with Stephanie this time.
Yeah. I wasn't an early horror reader. I was an early reader. I read all sorts. Horror I didn't get to until sort of early 20s. But I grew up reading dark literature, and I would include Dickens in that. And I had a Russian phase, which was very grim and depressing, and I probably read it at the wrong time because I didn't understand half of it. But I found that I loved that gloomy vibe, that there's an element of the darkness of the human soul in that. And that's what I started to look for in other books and your ghost stories and your horror stories. And I moved on to that. Edgar Allan Poe, I think, was probably one of the earliest that I read that was truly horror. But others, it was late. It's dark literature for me. And that kept me away from all the romance and the lighter style. I do like a good comedy, but yeah, it took me into the dark side.
Nice. Mo, what about you?
Oh, geez. I'm the opposite of Stephanie. I started very, very young. So my sisters and I are all 5 years apart. My oldest sister is 10 years older than me. And she was really into horror books, or her boyfriend was into horror books, and he would give them to her, and I would kind of sneak them away. And when I was 9, the first 2 books that I would qualify as being scary was It. I read It when I was 9.
Ooh.
Don't recommend it. And then secondly, I read The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury, and fell in love with absolutely the short form of Ray Bradbury's book, but also that there were kids involved in a scary story, in something like It. And I really fell in love with how terrified I was. I think I was just like, I like being scared. And yes, I admit to being the weird kid and liking being scared. And I think that that's what really made me be like, what else is there? Like, what else can I read? What else can I watch? And I think at that age as well, not just reading, but we were in the era of like when cable was new here in the States. and we were just anything was on any time of the day. Like you could come home from school and The Howling would be on, and there was like no holds barred. You could just watch whatever. But I have to say that it was my first book that I read cover to cover, as a horror book as a very young kid, and then had to read it again when I was about 15 or 16, and to understand, just kind of brush through again, and realizing that it's still absolutely petrifying piece of story. Like that is a terrifying book. It really, really, really is. I think that the I think the book is way scarier than the movies have been, but that's just me.
Well, to read it at 9, I mean, I'm sure that sticks with you. Like that has stuck
just a little bit.
That has stuck with you for sure. So, Francesca, the same question for you. What was the first book or the book that you read of horror that made you love horror?
Sure. Yeah. I started early like Mo too. I had an older sister who's 10 years older. And so I got introduced to Salem's Lot by Stephen King at probably around 10 or 11 or so. And it absolutely terrified me. It was just super creepy, talked about things that I didn't understand, which made it even more scary for me. And then I kind of graduated into more Nancy Drew type stuff and loved all that Girl Friday mystery and like finding the mystery of the witch under the stairs kind of stuff. I love that, the paranormal things. And then as I got a little bit older, it was all about Sandman and Neil Gaiman. So any and all things Neil Gaiman, that was my jam. And it was really Neil Gaiman that inspired me to keep being a horror writer, even though he's more of considered a fantasy author. For me, he does a lot in the horror genre. So Stephen King and Neil Gaiman for me.
Nice. Keith, what about you?
I kind of came to books in my teenage years, but in my early teenage years, it was horror films. And the thing of it was this was kind of like in the early 80s, and it was we were just getting video recorders in our households here. And my friend up the road, he was like an only child, and he got spoiled, so he got everything. He got a color TV in his room, and he got a video in his room, and he used to convince his mum to go to the local video store and get 18 rated movies, and we were kind of like 12. Yeah. So we were watching these things. We were watching like The Thing by John Carpenter, or Halloween, or The Fog, or so that kind of stuff was what really got me into it. So I was watching all this kind of 18 rated stuff, at a really sort of young age, and for some reason it never gave me like any nightmares or anything like that. I was just kind of like fascinated with it. I was like, oh, this is amazing. So that kind of like led me to books. And obviously I just kind of went down the obvious routes, which were, King, Lovecraft, Poe, Stoker. And then so that just kind of like sort of sparked all of that. And then I started looking at other things, which were actual sort of like occult books or witchcraft books and folklore and things like that. So the kind of horror was on screen first, and then it led to books, and then it led me into other elements which kind of incorporated in all of horror stories. So I went and sort of explored all of the mythology really after that, and really I kind of left all that as a teenager. I kind of left horror sort of. I didn't really sort of touch it in my 20s or my 30s, and then when I got back into my 40s, and then I started writing it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm really back into this again. But I don't really sort of mainstream isn't really like. I'm more interested in what these guys here create, or any of the other indie guys that are out there. I just find that it's so diverse now, and there's so much, there's so many more interesting voices that I'm just. If I read anything now, it's by an indie. It isn't really by the mainstream anymore. But I can thank the mainstream for pushing me in the right direction at an early age. Yeah. and Ray's mum, of course. Yeah. Who would hire the films for us.
That actually leads to my next question that I have for you guys is, what do you guys think, or can you determine the success of a book in the horror genre? Because I feel like the horror genre is becoming more and more popular because there's vastness in it, right? Like psychological thrillers I consider to be horror books, because I mean those things will scare you because they can really happen, right? So I feel like it's becoming more and more popular. So how can, or do you guys think that you can determine the success of a book in the horror genre now?
I will try to. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go. No, you go. Ladies first.
I will try to answer this from my experience. I think that to your point, Amy, there's such a vast amount of subgenres in horror that we have a lot of opportunity to really infiltrate the market. But I feel like then in that we have the caveat of like what is popular in horror on screen.
Yes.
What's bringing, is it, franchise horror? Or now are people writing slashers in the indie space? What's next? Is it, the haunted house and ghost back? Now there's a bunch of ghost story books. So it's almost where we're kind of looking to different types of media as to what's catching people's eyes. And then we fall into that. But sometimes I feel like the way publishing can be a little glacial sometimes, and sometimes we're behind the curve. With, that movie was last year and this book is coming out a year and a half later. We're a little bit at the mercy of that. But I think that we're also, especially in how vast this genre can be, we're also tastemakers, because I feel like we're finding a lot of material now is being adapted from IP and books that once were indie and that are now making more of a bigger splash in that arena. So I think that as much as we've been looking towards like cinema, we're now they're kind of saying, well, what are you guys doing over there? Like maybe we can make movies that are, because you've been successful in this particular subgenre. So I think that you cannot determine the success of it. And it really depends on how aggressive you are, I think, with like your marketing team behind you, with yourself, what resonates, how aggressive you are in your own, tooting your own horn with things, and, understanding that there's a space for all of us at the table, and championing others that are also writing in your particular space. I think that's really one of the ways that we can win and kind of corner the market that way.
Nice. See, that was beautifully said. I couldn't have said it any better. So I love it. Does anybody have anything they want to add?
I just added that luck as well. It could be just one of those people seeing something at the right place at the right time. And I think there's so many of us out there that you can just get overlooked without all the marketing that you were talking about, without the following. I do worry a little bit that as certain horror genres are stepping up into the main book lists, that it'll become a bit like when you go into a bookshop, you see all the similar covers, you've got the main one, and then you've got all the copies, and they'll say, oh, right, these horror books are coming through. Now we're going to go and try and get others that are similar. So they'll try and push you to write a certain way. And I think the indie genre being what it is, people tend to write what they want to write rather than necessarily what the market wants. I always seem to be behind the curve, ahead of the curve, not in the curve. But I do think there's a lot of luck in there as well, and a bit of who maybe.
Yeah, I definitely think it's.
Yeah, I think if you can secure an agent and things kind of change, I think the landscape opens up for you. If so. That's the thing. It's but that in itself is it's just a harder task, just as hard as trying to get published. Sending your work to agents, it's just kind of, it can be quite soul destroying, really, because sometimes they don't even reply to you ever. So sometimes you will get some feedback, which I've had some feedback at times. But I think that can make the difference. I think that can be the thing that opens the door. Certainly in terms of screen rights and what have you. I mean, who was it recently? Was it Paul Tremblay? Didn't he do Knock at the Cabin got that it wasn't called that, but then it got done by M. Night Shyamalan, didn't it? So it was like, so things like that can materialize, but you've got to be plugged in to the right people, really. So so I mean, that's what we all hope for, is that someone takes an interest in something like that, so you just keep plugging away.
Yeah.
It's definitely, if your bum swung one way and then it swung the other way, it'll probably land in the middle at some point. So I wouldn't worry about it.
That could be very painful.
It'll all come good for you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more like a labor of love. I think you guys write in horror because you love horror, and you always have like the fads and the trends of, slashers and ghosts and all those things that kind of come. But as long as you kind of write into what you enjoy reading and what you want to write about, I think that is what is expanding the horror market and popularity, right? Because I've met a lot of people recently that are like, oh, I would never read a horror book, and they're like, oh, but I like psychological thrillers. And I was like, so you do like that? Because that's how I classify it as. It's just a different thing. It's not just like gore and slashers. It's all the subgenres that are in that. So I think it's becoming more of like popular, at least maybe it's been with my age, but it's becoming more popular. More and more people are asking and in reading it, not necessarily on trend. That's why I love indie writers, because we as indie writers kind of write what we want, not necessarily what's trending or fad, and it's a work of love. And I always find those to be the scariest ones for me. That's why all of your guys' books keep me up at night. Okay. But Francesca, do you have anything to add to that before we move on?
No, I mean, everyone pretty much said what I was thinking as well. I'll just add that I think success really does hinder not just on the content, but a lot of it does have to do with the marketing and the publisher behind the book.
So you guys are all horror writers. So how do you determine where your character goes to create suspense and chills and all of that within your stories? So is it more like character talks to you, or do you really have like a game plan? But what is your guys' process in making your characters kind of come across in that way within your writing? Whoever wants to go first. We'll popcorn this one, so it's fair.
I can go. So I'm more of a pantser. I'm not a plotter, which means that I just write and I have no idea what the plot is. I don't know where the story's going. And so it can be a little stressful at times when you're trying to finish the story and see how all these disparate pieces come together, but they always end up doing that. So when I write, it's not so much thinking through the character and what their motivations are or what their background is. I'm literally just taking dictation on what I see, hear, and feel in my mind. I know it sounds kind of weird. Not everybody writes that way, but that's kind of what gets me going at night is that, I don't know what's going to happen when I turn the page as I'm writing it. And so I'm kind of my own first reader as I'm just kind of writing what I'm seeing in my mind, like a little movie as it's taking place.
Nice. Keith, what about you?
I mean, I'm not much of a planner in terms of writing things down, making notes or anything like that. I kind of plan things out in my head. So I do a game of sort of join the dots in my head. Like before, I used to take the dog for a walk on long walks, and then I would sort of work things out that way. But sometimes it can just be like a title will pop into my head, and I'll go, "Oh, what's that?" And then I'll just say, "Right, I'm going to explore what that means," and I just do not have any material for it whatsoever. So what I'll do is I'll just think about what that title might mean, and then a story can just develop from it. And whether it kind of shouts it loud at me, it means it's probably going to be a novella. If it's just kind of squeaking away there in the background, it's probably just going to be a short story or something. So it really just depends. I mean, I think for my second ever novel that I did, there was one day I woke up and I'd been thinking about it for days, and I sat at the computer and I just typed out 20,000 words in one day, because it just all kind of like came together in my head, like just fell into place. That doesn't happen all the time, by the way. I really wish it did. But yeah, it can be just kind of like a real random thing. It doesn't. It's almost like I want the characters to tell me about them, like so from the idea in my head, like rather than me dictate what it's going to be. It's kind of like this inspiration just comes from somewhere and it just talks to you and it just kind of takes you. But I also like to be I like to be open and receptive. So I like to maybe have a story mapped out to a certain point and then kind of invite those moments of inspiration, because all of a sudden something will come along and you go, this takes the story in a completely different direction, and actually it's better than what I thought out. So I like to be open to that as well, so not so closed off to just an idea. And it's like what Francesca says, they kind of they emerge and they kind of grow and they evolve. And it just kind of like it's almost like it's strange. It's almost like you're not actually in charge. you're just like this kind of vessel that something is sort of like using you to like type away. So it doesn't wear its fingers out and you wear yours out. So yeah, so it's kind of bizarre. I mean, you get asked this question a lot about what your inspiration and what your process is, but I mean, if you could bottle it and sell it, you'd make a fortune. But you can't really put your finger on it. You just don't really know. It's God and the Angels or something like that. I don't know what it is. It's something bizarre. There you go.
Stephanie, what about you?
Well, I'm a complete pantser like Francesca. I just see these people, these characters, they come into my head and they might be looking a certain way, and then I just sit behind their eyes and let them walk and talk and do things. They just come alive. If I try outlining, I did once for my very first ever novel attempt years and years ago, and I wrote character descriptions, I wrote outline for each chapter. It did not work at all. The characters just went off and did their own thing. So I just forgot that, put it aside. And ever since then, I just start writing. And I don't know where I'm going and what's going to happen. But at a natural point, usually about 3/4 of the way through, the ending comes to me. And then I can go that way quite happily. But I will say the characters themselves, they come alive. But I've created a sort of my own world in the 5 Turns of the Wheel series, and I've got Reborn as well, and I've got these 3 characters in there. So when I come to write them, Tommy, Betty and Fiddler, these horrible creatures, they sort of look human, but they're quite monstrous, but there's a humorous side there as well. But when I come to write them again, I just want to see what will they do next, how far will they go, and I bring in old myths and fairy tales if I can, old ways of doing things, and put them there and see what would they do in their universe. Those creatures now, they are alive to me. I don't know what it is about them. They're just there in my head, and they just tell me their stories. Like dictation in your head, as you said, that's a perfect way of putting it. So you get your own little movie going as well. You're just in a completely different world.
I could see that. This is why you guys are authors. You guys are super creative and you let your characters talk to you and take the wheel. So Mo, what do you do?
Sorry, I'm going to go on my own here, like Family Feud. So I'm going to be the I am a complete plotter, I will say, absolutely. And I think that comes from, I started off in screenwriting, and then really found my home in the literary space. So everything for me, every character has like at least 2 pages of character bios. Their likes, dislikes, what do they like to eat? What are they going to do? What are their hopes and dreams? Like and that really helps me steer the character in the right direction. Because to Stephanie's point, sometimes the characters will go and do whatever, they want to do. But it really gives me insight as to what is going to frighten the character and how the character has emotional reactivity to what's happening. I'm also a behavioral therapist, so I kind of put that into what my characters do as well. So I will outline what I want the stories to do. I usually write in 3 or 5 acts, and then I'll write which act of the story is what, and that's how I'll complete a story. The only story that I've ever completely kind of been a pantser on is the first story that opens my book, Love the Sinner, which is titled A Battle Between Boys, and Stephanie's read that. And it's that was the only one that I literally just sat down and wrote start to finish, because it was really like someone was whispering in my ear that this is what you needed to say, and this is the story that needed to be told at the time. It's a very painful story. And I think I think I'm very grateful that was the only time that a story has been like as painful as that one was to write, has been in my ear. I'm like, I will take outlining from here on out. Please don't do that again. So I think that I might be the only plotter in the group, which I'm fine with. It's okay. I used to be an on my own.
Well, so with you plotting, right? Because I feel like for pantsers, they let their characters kind of take the wheel and do that. But when you're plotting, are you like very strict where you keep to your outline, or is there sometimes that characters go rogue and you can't, reel them back in to do it? So how does that work for you when they go rogue? Outline stressed me out anyway, so I would be stressed. But what is that like for you since you do outline?
I think that it's interesting. It's interesting to find out where the story is going to go from there. Like, you do have an idea, and most of us have an idea. This is a story. This is the beginning. This is the middle. This is the end. But then when we start writing, we kind of meander through all of those pieces, and we end up somewhere else. We end up in our little video game side quests, and then we get kind of back on track to what we need to be doing. And I think that's what happens to me when I have my outline, like going through the axis, like kind of going around like what the act was going to do, and finally finding my way there, and like kind of moseying on to the next one. So I let the characters breathe a little bit and then just kind of bring them back into focus, and that's been really fun for me to kind of just let them off the leash a little bit and then just bring them back to center.
Nice. Well, I want to get this question really quick because I'm always curious to know, what is everybody currently reading at the moment? So Francesca, I'm going to go to you first. What are you currently reading?
So I'm almost done with a book by Nick Roberts called Anathema, and it is terrifying. It's about a family that lives kind of in the middle of a townhome. There's townhomes on either side, and they have crazy, potentially demonically possessed neighbors, still TBD. And it is absolutely terrifying. Kind of like what Mo was saying, it's that everyday horror of what happens if your neighbor goes rogue? What happens if there's a little space between the walls where your neighbor can come in and out of your own apartment without you knowing? I mean, it's just terrifying. So I highly recommend that book.
Wonderful. Stephanie, what are you reading?
Unmute myself. I've literally just finished one book. It's called Skeleton Key by Erin Kelly. That is a sort of mainstream thriller, and it's based a little bit. I don't know whether you had it over in the States, but some years back over here, there's a book called Masquerade, and it sent people on a treasure hunt around the country to find this little gold hair. And this book is based on an author or an artist who actually creates a book similar to that, and it causes problems when people who follow it, it's like a crazy followers, they think that the parts of this little gold skeleton that they're supposed to be looking for is actually within his daughter's body, so she gets attacked one day, but there's all sorts of family secrets and things within that one. So that's a very good sort of mystery, quite a great big chunky book. But I am actually reading another one at the same time. I try not to. I get stressed reading more than one book at a time, but then I find I end up doing it because people send books, or you pick up a friend's book and you want to read it. And the other book I've got on the go, and I must finish it, is Gabino Iglesias's The Devil Takes You Home. Hope I've got that right, and I'm part of the way through that at the moment. It is a very violent book. I'm not one for extreme horror, but I do like his writing. I've got Coyote Songs, I think it is, and his other one. This is when people ask me, I always forget, but I love those books, so I got this one. There is a particularly gruesome scene in there. I think Steve Asalo of Brigids Gate Press was talking about it recently, which involved bolt cutters and various body parts, and I've got through that. But it's about a man who's had these drug issues. His daughter needed medical care, and the only way he could get some money was to go back into the criminal life, and it's the journey he takes, even though his daughter dies sort of fairly early on, but it's family breakdown and all sorts of things. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of redemption story in there, possibly. I don't know yet because I'm only partway through. But he is a very good writer, but I do have to take it in sort of stages because it can be a little bit extreme for me at times.
It sounds extreme. I will have to check it out, but I'll probably do what you're doing, Stephanie, and read it and then go to like Puppies and Rainbows and come back for sure. Mo, what about you, Mo? What are you reading?
I am reading for the second time Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House. I love Grady's books because I love he's got a lot of levity in there, and still being like super terrifying, and he has a way of writing things where you are sound asleep and then you just blink and you're just like, oh my God, like what if that could really happen? Or what happens if X, Y, and Z? So that's been a really, really fun one. I also have read Gabino's book, and I did have to piecemeal that a little bit for myself. I did have to chase it with an episode of The Golden Girls because it was a lot. It was a lot, but it's absolutely beautifully written book. But I've read that. I'm also reading again for the second time. I try to read 2 books at once because I know that I have someplace else for my brain to go to and kind of pivot, which is Melanie Anderson and Lisa Kroger's Toil and Trouble, which is about witches and women of the occult through history. And it's they don't get a lot of credit for as much of muses they've been to horror media. So excellent nonfiction book to pick up if you are a horror fan that's into witches.
Nice. 2 books at one time. Talk about like stress overload for me. That would just be like, which story am I reading? Keith, what about you? What are you currently reading? Are you reading more than one book at a time?
No, I'm like you. I can't cope with more than one at a time. That's probably due to my age, though. That's probably what that is. I am currently reading a book called The Ruin of Delicate Things by fellow Brit author Beverly Lee. Essentially, it's haunted house story, but there's a couple who've been through trauma. They've lost their son in an accident, and they're trying to sort of reconcile all of that. And then obviously there's also something to do with the husband's past and his sort of childhood when he lived in the village, and to do with Barrington Hall as well. So it's kind of like elements of sort of folklore in there as well. But it's fantastic, and Beverly's just got a real sort of sense for atmosphere and for mood, and it's just I'm about sort of 90% of the way through that at the moment, and then after that I've got Catherine McCarthy, Immortelle. I've got that one lined up. But I've got a TBR that's like, it's just up here, and I just look at it and go, yeah, okay. But I've got too many other things going on. I don't read as much as I would love to, because I just feel like I've got too much to do. But I kind of chip away, and I get there eventually. But yeah, I mean, Beverly's work, I love it. I've actually done a collaboration with her, which we can talk about maybe at some point. That's hopefully coming out next year. So yeah, she's cool. I enjoy Beverly's work a hell of a lot.
Nice. Well, here's your chance to talk about it. So we are coming up on time,
right.
But I want to make sure that you guys get to talk about a little bit about what your books are and where people can find you and get in touch with you. So we're going to go back to the normal order, but this time it's Keith, Stephanie, Francesca, and Mo. So Keith, how can everybody find you and your books and get in touch with you?
Okay. Right. Well, the best place would really be, it was Twitter. I don't know what it is now. And then I'm also on Instagram. And then, am I doing this right? Is it coming into focus? Is that it?
There you go.
There we go. Yeah. So that's my dark fantasy novella via Brigids Gate, which came out last year. It's basically a dark fairy tale. Stephanie had something to do with it in terms of formatting and probably pointing out wrong things in it. So yes, so you can get that via Brigids Gate, and then kind of next year I have 2 things coming out. I have a dark sci-fi called Synthetica, and that's coming out via, I shouldn't say because there hasn't been an official announcement, so I might get wrong. And then there's the collaboration with Beverly, which is about a troop of vampires called A Light of Little Radiance, and that's coming out by the same publisher that I can't mention because there's been no official announcement. But you can probably guess.
So much suspense.
I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
I like you're leaving us on a suspense note. I like it.
It could be BGP, but it could. I'm not saying for certain. So there you go.
I love it. Stephanie, what about you?
You can find me mostly on Twitter as LStevie. That's EL_Stevie. I am looking to shift a little bit because Twitter doesn't seem to be what it used to be, although it's the place I prefer. So you can find me on Blue Sky as well, and my website's stephanieellis.org. I am on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, but I'm just trying to cut back. So I don't want to be on all the different platforms. So you might see me fade away from some of those. I don't know. As to books, I've got some behind me. So I've got the 5 Turns of the Wheel and Reborn. This was Brigids Gate Press, their folk horror, Pause, which is a bio horror, Bottled, which is a gothic, and my latest, I can only show it on the Kindle because I haven't got my print copy yet. That's the Woodcutter. And that's a folk horror that came out not so long ago. I've just signed a contract with Lycan Valley Press for a book called The Barricade, which is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi horror when people think it's going to be the end of the world. So the great and the good go below ground and leave a load of people behind, and then the world doesn't end and they want to come back out, but they're not necessarily going to be allowed to, and there's this great barricade that stops them. So there's all sorts of things going on there. I am currently writing a slasher horror novella in verse with Shane Douglas Keane. I did actually start writing the Final Girl verses yesterday, so it's not far from the end. He's just done the killer scene as well. He's gone rampaging through this camp. That has got a publisher, possibly, probably, sort of, but we haven't been allowed to say yet. So I'm hoping we'll get that done before the end of the year, and then we'll find out whether it's according to what they like and out next year. So that's what I'm working on, and I'm also working on the next one in the 5 Turns of the Wheel series, and it's going to be a Yule based story because I wanted to write something set in the snow that people would read around Christmas time and just curl up and read a good bit of folk horror, digging out the old myths and legends of times gone by.
Nice. So you have a lot of stuff coming up. Yeah. I'm excited. And we have suspense about one of your books, which is exciting. Francesca, what about you?
So folks can find me at francescamaria.com, and I'm on all the socials at Writer of Weird. You can get They Hide Short Stories to Tell in the Dark in print, ebook, and Audible. I'm also a writer of comics, so I'm the creator of the Black Cat Chronicles comic book series, which you can also find on Amazon, on Comixology, as well as my website. And I've turned in a couple of short stories for different anthologies that are going to be coming out in 2024.
Nice. Mo?
Hello. Well, I've recently published Love the Sinner, which is, I don't have a bookshelf back here. It looks like this. My little Scully book. So it is 8 disquieting stories bound by sin. Like I said before, it is based on the 7 deadly sins with one bonus sin. I have that book's out. I have a 2-book series coming out next year called Claire Violence, which is based all short story collections, which are based on the major arcana from the tarot. And that is coming out through Spooky House Press. You can find me at Mo Mashadi on pretty much any socials. I'm mostly on X, I guess what it's called now. So I'm there. I'm on Blue Sky as well. I'm on Instagram. You can also catch me on momashadi.com. You can catch my journalism through Dread Central and Fangoria. I also write for them. I'm also a lecturer in horror cinema working with the University of Sheffield, Prairie View, Texas A&M. I do trauma and horror cinema lecturing throughout the globe. So that's where I'm at.
Nice. Well, you guys, I want to thank all of you guys for taking time out to come and talk to me and join me for this horror panel. And I want to thank BookFest for this amazing opportunity. So thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, BookFest.